for the introduction. And maybe just to set the context, I'm not here to present once again the results presentation. As you all be aware, we presented our results on the 21st of August. And so the whole purpose of today is really just to share with you the thinking behind what led to the delivery of those results. And so to kick off, I think it's fair to say that sustainability is really a concept that is ever present in our lives, in the lives of, at our personal level and certainly the business level. And when we look at Exxaro, it's a company that's evolved from ISCO back in 2000. And what happened there really, ISCO was previously a state-owned entity. And through various, I suppose, changes in environmental circumstances at the time, you fast forward to 2006, the assets of ASC's, which was established in 2001 in terms of the coal assets, were then combined with the assets of Kumba to form Exxaro. And today, what used to be ISCO, a state-owned entity, now exists in the form of 3 separate companies, including Exxaro, Kumba Iron Ore, and Oslo, and all of which are listed on the JSE. And so for us, we're really proud that Exxaro is really developed and has been established from the former principles of transformation in South Africa, and it continues to uphold those principles. And in addition to that, we believe that the evolution of Exxaro has really been evidence of sustainability, and some of the key elements of sustainability which I think need to be appreciated is adaptation in terms of recognizing changing times, as well as growth, which is what most of you will be interested in as far as investment is concerned. But perhaps just to take you through, how do we think of sustainability as Exxaro? What is sustainability to us? And what is important to bear in mind is that context matters when you talk about sustainability. And the context for us is really the society which we find ourselves within. And it's the South African society at first, and secondly, the global society. And as a result, given that and the fact that business is one of many activities that take place in society, stakeholders and society in general have an expectation of benefit from us. We also recognize the fact that, particularly as a mining company, we have a huge negative impact on the environment and the communities. And what we impact on are the resources which are required, both in terms of intergenerational, in terms of looking at generations today and what societies need today, but also intergenerational across time as far as what society may need tomorrow. And consequently, the definition that we've adopted is really sustainability at the end of the day from a business perspective is about endurance. And what do we mean by that? Continuously pursuing and achieving our strategic intentions, considering the context of the diverse and often conflicting, or you may choose to use complementary interests and dependencies on those very same resources that society depends on, but while at the same time we fulfill the societal expectations of benefit. A broad definition, but I think it really tries to get to the essence of what is it that we're trying to achieve as a business. And this was already mentioned, that it consists of a number of dimensions. Sustainability is not just about the preservation of that lesser spotted bullfrog in the forest, or on the other hand, just the planting of trees. There are a number of considerations that one has to take into account. Issues across time in terms of short-term and balancing those against long-term considerations. A lot of us use the 6 capitals in terms of defining and framing the sustainability model, and we do the same. It's about balancing and placing the right emphasis on those issues depending on the time. I think the biggest issue and the biggest challenge for a lot of management teams is really how you balance the different values across different stakeholders in managing your business going forward. Also have to have both an inward-looking perspective in terms of how's the business performing, what is the culture within the organization, what are the leadership competencies, what's the performance of the business, and how does that compare and deliver to the external expectations, and hence having an outside perspective in terms of saying how is a strategy not only fulfilling investor expectations but overall societal expectations. And it is this constant balancing and rebalancing of issues, I think, that really makes sustainability a challenge, and hence the iterative nature and the interactive nature that one has to consider as well. And I use the word iterative because I think within sustainability there's really a reinforcing element where with each success that you achieve, You want to do it again, and that's how you really build resilience and be able to endure some of the challenges that you then encounter. But sustainability doesn't exist in a vacuum. I think we're all aware that in South Africa there's a huge desire for success and for progress. And there's a huge expectation from business to be able to deliver to this progress. And for Exxaro, our strategic intent is to invest, to develop, and to grow. However, to achieve that, we have a desire for certainty, and that certainty provides security. But it's not a one-dimensional path from a desire to progress. I believe that there are a couple of steps to achieving that. And what I'm trying to say here is that to get from desire to progress, I think first and foremost, cooperation, which then creates that climate of stability, is required between ourselves and our stakeholders. And I think given the recent strikes that we've seen in the platinum sector, Exxaro has been fortunate that in the year that we reported to end June, compared to the previous year where we did have a strike, there was a marked difference in performance, and we attribute that largely to the stability that we're able to achieve with our labor force. And how we achieved that was that following the strike last year, the CEO started off what we call the CEO roadshows, where he went through a roadshow in each of the business units, really finding out what the issues were, where the challenges lie, and where we could respond and how. Fast forward to a year later, and when he went back to the same operation where he started off, a lot of the issues that had been raised were addressed. Obviously, in between, there had to be delegation to management in terms of, these are the issues that have been raised by employees. This is how you need to respond to them, and it's important that I actually, as the CEO, find out what has been done about that. And so this year has started off with a follow-up on a lot of those issues. And so what has really been keen or interesting about that is that it's not so much about issues, but it's probably more how we respond to those issues in order to achieve that stability. And then through stability, we're then able to collaborate with our stakeholders, both internally with our employees as well as externally. And the collaboration as well also talks to how Exxaro collaborates with government in terms of dealing with some of the bigger picture issues. Then moving from stability, you then start providing some level of predictability in terms of the future. And with that predictability, you're then able to plan. And then it is then that you then start getting closer to that ability to then plan and make progress. And that's how we believe we'll be able to make a difference. And so what this diagram really represents is our philosophy, our business philosophy, in terms of how we make sense of the world. And excuse the small writing, but in essence what he's trying to say is that we see a strong link between our values, our mission and vision, as well as our strategy. And the link between those is really the leadership style, the kind of leaders that we have, and the culture that the leaders build in that organization. And quite often, and I'm sure a lot of you have read the books about how there's a link between strategy, operation, and people. And that's really what that triangle is talking about. And what you're seeing on the outside of that are really are the expected outcomes. And what we have as an expected outcome there is we expect each of our leaders to be incredible in terms of their behavior and how they lead the organization and building an incredible and high performance culture. Ethics and governance is key to leadership. And later on, I'll show one or two slides in terms of our board and management. And then we've then placed much more emphasis than we've done in the past on stakeholder engagement. And there the belief is that, and I think we've seen that as well, inability to engage with stakeholders results to huge hemorrhaging of strategic objectives. And more we're seeing it in South Africa and certainly a lot of other developing countries, but certainly also in developed countries, that poor stakeholder engagement and overall lack of appreciation of the fact that a business exists within a context results in good strategies not being achieved. And it is through those strategies that we're able to create the concept of shared value and values with our society. And what we expect in terms of an outcome from that is things like, I guess, respect and upholding the stakeholder dignity. Those may feel like soft issues, but they're becoming very important in a context like South Africa. We're proud that recently, working together with KPMG, we've developed an instrument, social return on investment. We assessed our social and labor plans in the past 5 years using that instrument we're very proud to tell you that a large number of those projects actually scored 1 and above, which means that they were sustainable, they had long-term impact. And there's obviously lessons to be learned from those projects that have scored below 1. And when planning for the next 5-year social and labour plan projects, we'll be taking those lessons learned into consideration. And I have to also emphasize the issue of communication with stakeholders. What I've learned when it comes to stakeholder engagement is how do we respond to stakeholder issues? A lot of the time stakeholders engage with us, they raise issues, but quite often as management teams and as employees we don't respond, or we don't respond adequately and certainly inappropriately. And what is important about responding is really the communication channel that you establish with your stakeholder. From an integrated reporting perspective, the integrated report is obviously an important element of reporting, but we're also incorporating technology. And quite often we refer people to the website, and so there's cross-referencing between the hard copy document and the website, and the two often talk together. I think if we try to consolidate everything in one document, we'll probably end up with more of a doorstopper rather than a document that you can engage usefully. And so this really, for Exxaro, establishes a philosophy against which we reflect all our decisions and actions. And moving on from that, how we've integrated sustainability and sustainable development in our strategy. The circle on your on the right-hand side of the slide really shows how the 5 capitals model, in terms of Richard Porritt's model, are integrated and talk to our 4 strategic objectives of improving our portfolio, achieving operational and financial excellence, demonstrating responsibility and accountability, as well as developing the leadership and people. And one of the things I forgot to mention with the philosophy earlier is that it has both an internal and an external perspective, which is something that is important for us in terms of maintaining the balance of all our actions. In terms of strategic intentions, I've mentioned the intentions to invest, to develop and grow. We believe we will not be able to achieve sustainable economic returns without considering sustainable development in our strategy, and hence the model on the right-hand side. Part of developing the business strategy is understanding our markets. Our business model is a resource to market business model, where we have recently, coming out of a strat session with the board, won't necessarily establish an exploration mining company, but where we can, we will firstly grow from organic resources. We have coal resources of more than 10 billion tons in situ, and it's really developing those resources as best we can, developing mines out of that, beneficiating and processing the coal, and then applying the appropriate logistics and innovation to take that coal to market. Growth is growth which we'll achieve not only through organic, but where opportunities arise through acquisition as well. And where we consider acquisitions, sustainability and sustainable development concepts will also be used to assess the viability of that acquisition. And we recognize that operating in an environment like Africa, it is very naive to think that you will succeed by yourself. Perhaps where you can, that will be the first preference, but to a large extent, success in Africa and other developing countries will require local partnerships to a large extent for both knowledge and technical skills. So from a governance perspective then, and continuing from really the earlier presentations, it's really the board of directors is really no different to what you'd find for a company of the caliber of Exxaro. Just some of the key highlights is that from a stakeholder perspective, and I've shared with you earlier in the earlier slide that stakeholder engagement has become a key part of the philosophy. And in this year, we adopted the standard, the AA1000 standard for stakeholder engagement. And the reason for that was to bring more uniformity of approach in terms of stakeholder engagement, as well as standard practice across the organization. We have about 8 operations in Mpumalanga as well as Lephalale, at different sizes and at different stages of development. However, each one of them at any point in time have to engage with stakeholders. And we felt that it was important that there be a standard process in as far as stakeholder engagement is concerned. Talking to some of the transformation objectives, the board is 75% HDSA, 70% independent directors, and 8% women. Obviously, with the minimum target in terms of the mining chart of 10%, we recognize that we have some work to do there. When it comes to the management team, 75% HDSA as well, and 50% black, and 25% women. And that's just pictures of the management team. You may recognize a few faces there, as well as the board. And the board, in my view, consists of key members who have key capabilities. I think one of them is the systems thinking, which talks to the issue of recognizing that we exist within a context. And secondly, stakeholder engagement. That's an organization-wide responsibility and not just the responsibility of one person. And that enables aligned communication with stakeholders, out of which we're then able to establish collaboration and shared risk, and then lastly being able to then implement and execute on the strategy. So that's really the governance aspect. It really talks to the head of the organization in terms of how do we see ourselves evolving over the next couple of years. From a growth perspective, Exxaro is largely a coal mining business. However, we also recognize the imperative of climate change and its impacts. However, it would be irresponsible if we'd stopped all coal mining today and started developing renewable energies, particularly given the current challenges we're facing with regards to electricity supply. In the meantime, we have invested in a renewable energy business together with Tata Power, and the overall aim, in as far as Exxaro is concerned, is really to ensure security of supply of coal in order to ensure security supply of electricity for South Africa. And GMAP is a huge project for us where we've invested, or by the end of that project, we'll have invested 10.2 billion in Lephalale for the supply of coal to the Medupi power station. And the whole journey towards sustainability is really one of transitioning from a pure focused and at some point in time to renewable energy. And that's really going to be determined by the policies that are established by government. You'll be aware that recently we took ownership of Total Coal South Africa, and that, what we've been saying to the market for now, that plays into our strategy of increasing our exports, which is another element that's important, by the way, for the South African economy in terms of increasing export earnings. But we see that giving us an opportunity to improve on our portfolio as well going forward and continuing the security of supply of coal to Eskom. It's just to highlight the improvement in our export allocation. And then from a productivity perspective, you know, a lot of the time when we speak of productivity, the focus seems to be only on labor productivity. We've been making progress in that regard, but other areas as well where we believe we can begin to capture some margin is looking at a much broader definition of productivity. So when it comes to carbon management, the slide on your left shows before we embarked on a few transactions where we disposed of some businesses, and the slide on your right is looking at adjusted numbers after we had disposed of some of those energy-intensive business units. Water, an important issue for us, particularly in the Waterberg, given that in spite of it being called the Waterberg, it's a very water-stressed area of the country. Reuse and recycling of industrial water is important. I think most importantly is making sure that where we dispose of used water, it is in a quality that doesn't cause deterioration in the surface water. And we've seen huge improvements when we compare year to date to 2013. The business is still in transition, so we haven't yet established a steady state in terms of understanding the real benefits of some of our efforts. But we believe by the time that GMAP comes into full production and some of the other projects are fully developed, we'll be able to get a much better understanding. And then lastly, the last few slides, this is biodiversity, and really echoing the point that I made earlier, that as a mining business, we have a huge impact on the environment. And so biodiversity management is really a holistic approach to environmental stewardship, recognizing that we have an impact in terms of materials being consumed for the operation of the business, but also waste being generated, which could potentially impact negatively on the environment. And a holistic approach allows us to manage that balance and to have that inward and outward looking perspective. And this is really just talking to the management approach in terms of key objectives, understanding the scope, and really establishing the business case. We have, over the years and continue today, embarked on a number of projects which have to do with conserving the environment. The top left shows you a rhino relocation where we relocated about, how many were there? About 12 rhinos from South Africa to Botswana. Water conservation, very key. During the construction of a major road in Lephalale, relocation of baboon spiders, as well as many other projects. And those really just become part and parcel of how we embark on projects. Really understanding the environment, doing baseline assessment, and then taking a structured and progressive approach. And obviously, most lastly, is really the financial or the economic impact. And this is the slide we presented our results. Employees continue to be the biggest beneficiaries in terms of economic value added and distributed, followed by none other than the investors in terms of the dividends. And then I shan't forget communities as well. And we'll continue to see huge amounts of money going into community development, but more with partners rather than on our own. And so lastly, in essence, Exxaro sustainability, we see it's a timeless journey. However, we have regular milestones. It's something that requires pace, endurance, and certainly along that journey, responsibility. And from a business perspective, we'll continue to invest, develop, and grow, and so the cycle continues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mzila. We'll now move on to a question session. If you could please direct your questions at Mzila. There are 2 roaming mics that will come round to you. If you could stand up, introduce yourself, and tell us which institution you represent before you ask the question. Thank you. There's one there. Okay.
Thanks very much for your presentation. I'm Mike Davis from Kagoda Consulting. In terms of water, obviously, as you mentioned, is a very important issue for Exxaro. I think the last statement from the Department of Water Affairs regarding outstanding water use licenses included a number of Exxaro mines. So I was wondering whether there's any update on the number of Exxaro mines that are currently operating without water use licenses, which is obviously a regulatory requirement, and risks potential shutdown and various other regulatory interventions by the Department of Water Affairs. I think Glisa was one of those mines that was listed previously on that, so maybe just an update on that would be great. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. I think my understanding is that as of today, all our operations operate with a water use license. Where we have a water use license still outstanding, it's for a new project that we're developing in Belfast, and that won't proceed until we have a water use license in place.
Hi, thanks.
Hi.
Malango from WWF. I'm interested in that calculation of the economic value created or added. Is the environment specifically included in that? And if so, how? And if not, why not?
No, I won't say it has been. And I know it's something that is outstanding when it comes to appreciating the real return of the efforts that we make. So it's not a calculation that we've taken to that extent. It's something that it's certainly a potential area of improvement in our calculation of value added.
Hi there, Amy Girdwood. I'm a sustainability and legal consultant, and I'm also doing my master's at the moment at Cambridge in sustainability leadership.
Good luck.
And I was just wondering about that CEO roadshow that you were talking about, and that the CEO has then gone and got feedback. I mean, is that going to be something that's going to be integrated into your process in terms of stakeholder engagement, that there will be this continual feedback? Because I think often that's the case, as you alluded to, that messages kind of get lost along the way. So stakeholder engagement happens, but not very effectively.
It is something that we have been developing as part of our ongoing stakeholder engagement, and what we're seeing that it's already beginning to evolve into something else. And that something else is really around the fact that the CEO really doesn't always have the time to be engaging, or rather to be going to each operation. It's the reason that we have subordinate managers to manage mines. And I think the issue is around passing on the knowledge of and the ability to engage with employees. Because what's been happening now is that employees then avoid actually voicing issues with management. They just want to talk to the CEO. And so we need to strike a balance between the CEO being available to engage with employees on a one-to-one basis and addressing issues without taking away from the day-to-day duties of management. Otherwise, we'll find that issues actually just boil up under the surface, waiting for the CEO to come on board again.
No, absolutely. I mean, that wouldn't be practical.
No,
But I see that Mervyn King is talking now about a chief, I think it's a chief stakeholder responsibility officer that sits on the board. I don't know if you've heard anything about that.
No, I haven't. I mean, I've been sharing some of my thoughts with the Exco team on stakeholder engagement at Exxaro. And the way that we see it is that it actually needs to be a delegated responsibility to everyone within the organization. No one person can engage with all stakeholders or be the chief. Certainly at the end of the day, the CEO is the designated chief of all things that happen in the organization. It's really how you organize yourself for issues, particularly the material issues, to be communicated bottom up and to reach the right level on time, and then to be responded to effectively and then communicated back through the organizational structures.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Anne-Marie Tipu from Investec Asset Management. You spoke to, I think it was a social return instrument you've developed with KPMG.
Yes.
And then you mentioned that sort of quite a high proportion of your projects scored favorably with this instrument. Is it possible to give us a little bit of color or insight to what this instrument looks at and measures particularly?
I hope I can remember some of the elements. But I think one of the key distinguishing features between successful and unsuccessful project is really the approach. So in my experience, what I've seen is that with a lot of social development projects, the approach is one of it's something that we have to do, we have no option. And we actually don't even spend a lot of money on it. And you look at the approach that is taken to the development of a mine, where you have project management body of knowledge being thrown at the problem. What we've done is said, actually, we need the same approach for both types of projects. Whether you're spending 5 million on a community project, at the end of the day, the kind of impact that you want to have with that is probably as big as the kind of impact you will expect to have from a 5 billion rands project. And maybe the numbers are quite large and doesn't make it seem like a reasonable comparison. But I think the key thing is, firstly, the approach to the development of the project. Secondly, it is the perspective that you take. I think if you want it to be a short-term project, plan it and implement it as a short-term project. Don't implement a short-term project that you hope to then camouflage as a long-term project. So a lot of the success also has to do with more the philosophy of approach rather than the practicalities. The other element is the involvement of the beneficiaries. So the buy-in. So the DMR, from a regulatory perspective, encourages that we got to have input from the local municipality in terms of IDP, or we've got to include the beneficiaries and understand what their needs are. So developing a project that will meet the needs of the beneficiaries. That's what's been important. And then the last important thing is that for local economic development projects, you got to have a market and market development. And so developing relevant businesses that will get their products to the market is important.
We have time for one last question.
Thank you. My name is Peter from the High Securities. I'm just a bit concerned by lack of diversity on your board in terms of gender diversity. I've read a bit of some empirical research about how companies that have more females or a reasonable proportion of female on their boards outperform those that do not have. What is Exxaro? What are you doing about it? I think what we have seen is most of the companies do bring in female board members, but the ratio doesn't really improve because they do not bring them to replace someone. They just bring them to add on to whatever number of males was there. If you can just probably give us a bit more around the strategy around increasing the diversity of your board from a gender perspective. Thank
Sure.
you.
It is an area of concern for us as well, and currently there are a few changes that are being considered within the board, and those will probably be announced over the next 6 to 12 months. And in replacing some members of the board, as part of the ordinary cycle of changing board members, gender diversity will be considered. So it is something that is top of mind for the board, and certainly for the Remuneration and Nominations Committee as well.
Hi, I'm Mthenjane. I'm a pension lawyer at Bowman Gilfillan. From 2011, pension funds are required by statute to consider ESG requirements when investing. I'm curious to know whether you're able to comment on your experience from pension fund investors and whether that requirement has translated into them being a pull factor in Exxaro's business.
It has been a factor, probably not one of the biggest factors. And the reason I say that is that I think Exxaro, with the benefit of time, has moved from doing what it does because of regulatory factors or I guess the point that you make. The perspective that we've taken is that we've been successful in South Africa firstly because of where we come from, and so the context within which we find ourselves is important, and that context has required for us to understand what are the issues that the community faces, as the community of South Africa faces. What are the key assets and capabilities that Exxaro possesses to be able to address those challenges? And hence it has been from that perspective that we then think that we'll be able to grow and develop. I think it's important that as part of that we consider, I think, investor expectations, that we do the right thing. I think it keeps us in check. It's important that we abide by the laws of the country. But I think where we are with that is that should be expected of any company. Those just should be the basics of operating in an environment like South Africa. It should no longer have to be enforced on a company that you got to abide by the law. You got to be responsible in terms of how you conduct your business. So moving from, I guess, my personal view is that I think we need to move away from social license to operate, which I find to be more compliance driven, to one of seeing yourself as being wanting to be more relevant and having a positive impact.